Daredevil is a hero whose origins and ongoing stories are steeped in loss and heartache. With each loved one gone, Murdock is forced to face his demons and summon an inner strength to be the hero his city needs. But where does tragedy end and heroism begin within the soul of Daredevil? It depends on who you ask. Murdock's blinding by radioactive waste, heightening of his remaining senses, and loss of his father are all intrinsic to the origin of Daredevil, and have been present since the beginning. But like any comic book character whose stories have continued to captivate both audience and creator alike, Daredevil's origin has been revisited and retold time and time again. Beyond his first appearance in 1964 in the pages of Daredevil #1, co-created by Stan Lee and Bill Everett, the most popular and influential retellings of the hero's origin story can be found in writer Frank Miller and artist John Romita Jr.'s 5-issue 1993 miniseries, Daredevil, The Man Without Fear, and writer Jeph Loeb and artist Tim Sale's 6-issue 2001 miniseries, Daredevil Yellow. Despite covering similar ground, with each tracking the time between Murdock's blinding and his ascension to the role of Daredevil, these two stories have vastly different perspectives on what drives the hero and what role tragedy ultimately plays in shaping his soul. By comparing their similarities in storytelling structure, character development, and relationships, while also contrasting their differences in writing style, art, world building, and ultimate outlook on life, love, and heroism, The Man Without Fear and Yellow reveal the essence of Daredevil and what it means to cope with personal tragedy. A quick rundown of each miniseries stories can help us establish the differences between the two. Spoilers ahead. The Man Without Fear is a modernized, decompressed retelling of Matt's early years, beginning with him being blinded at age 8. Matt is trained by the blind warrior Stick, and his washed-up boxer father Jack the Devil Murdock is eventually murdered when Matt is a teen, driving him to seek revenge and justice against his killers. As Matt goes through law school, he meets future legal partner Foggy Nelson, as well as love interest and fellow warrior Elektra. Time passes, with Matt eventually returning to New York after years away, saving a young girl from the clutches of kidnappers, taking down legions working for crime boss the Kingpin, and claiming the name of Daredevil, protector of Hell's Kitchen, at its end, triumphing over inner darkness to become the hero he was meant to be. Daredevil Yellow is told from the perspective of present-day Matt, who, like the lead characters in Loeb and Sale's Other Colors miniseries, is reflecting on his early days. Retelling the stories seen in Daredevil issues 1 through 4, Matt remembers the time when he first met and fell in love with Karen Page, who has tragically died since. Here we begin with Matt already blind, no Stick to train him, but in awe of his over-the-hill boxer father Badland Jack Murdock, who is also murdered for not throwing a championship fight. Matt quickly takes up the Daredevil name to bring justice to the killers and begins fighting crime throughout New York. Meanwhile, he and Foggy start their law firm, with Karen Page coming into their life as their secretary. Matt and Karen begin to fall for one another, though his double life as Daredevil is the cause of both secrecy and attraction between them. Yellow flits between superhero adventures, with its true arc being the growing love between Karen and Matt. Each of these origins are indebted to some degree to another story. Yellow fits into the structure of 4 classic comics, giving them a modern, more emotionally resonant interpretation. The Man Without Fear retrofits Daredevil's origin to coincide with Miller's seminal 80s run on the character, with the Kingpin and Elektra now added to include what the writer had used in his previous Daredevil comics. The hallmarks of the Daredevil origin are still present in both retellings. And in both stories, Matt's progression from a man without a purpose to the red-clad hero of Hell's Kitchen is shaped by both his traumatic origin and early tribulations. The name Daredevil was once a taunt, but becomes a symbol of Matt conquering fear and taking control of his own destiny. When I was a kid, the gang in the neighborhood would taunt me. They wanted me to fight back and thought I was scared. They called me Daredevil, and they laughed at me. I wasn't scared. I made a promise to my father that I wouldn't solve things with my fists, like he did. The greatest guy in the world, and he didn't want me to grow up to be like him. Daredevil, echoing from the schoolyard, from the bullies' taunts. Daredevil. He hated that name. He wanted to shove it down their throats, and now he wears it like a badge. Let all the bullies know, all of them, the kind that use knives and guns and the kind that use money. They have an enemy, Daredevil. But the Daredevil of Yellow is largely formed by the end of the first issue. His original costume in place, his drive toward justice pure. Jack Murdock is killed when Matt is a young adult, and his vengeance almost immediately shifts to altruistic heroism. It's just that Matt doesn't quite know why he keeps fighting after justice has been found for his father. Jack's murder happens in The Man Without Fear when Matt is a teenager. His revenge fast and brutal, but ending in tragedy after the death of a bystander. The shock and guilt drive Matt away from being a hero, spending years away from pursuing justice and a greater purpose. Temptation by Elektra doesn't bring him back. Even a brief encounter with a gang is just a moment to indulge in acceptable violence. He's afraid of unleashing the beast inside him once again and ending another life. But when a young girl is kidnapped by a trafficking ring, Matt leaps into action. He's the only one who can make a difference in a crime-ridden New York. Dressed in black and covering his eyes, saving a life gives him the chance to unleash his fury for the sake of good, a purpose-driven channel for his rage. Daredevil. It was in that one moment of cold purpose, that moment when Mickey's life hung in the balance, that moment when the wild part of him found itself calm and clear, that moment when Matt Murdock became a man. It was in that one moment that the name came back to him. Both paths ultimately lead to light, but one is a battle against utter darkness, the other a search for greater purpose and connection. There's absolutely no mistaking Man Without Fear and Yellow for one another, even at a brief glance. While Romita, son of legendary Spider-Man artist John Romita Sr., had begun with an art style highly evocative of his father, he had evolved into his own instantly recognizable look by the time of Man Without Fear's publication. Its blunt corners, hard features, heavy cross-hatching, lots of mood found within deep shadows and violence displayed in crunching, bloody combat. A good complement to Miller's ninja noir, grounded in scope, exaggerated in action. For Sale, frequent collaborator with Loeb, a story set in a bygone era and heavily influenced by the 60s complements his aesthetics. Yellow's exploits are in line with the swashbuckling classical action of Lee's original stories, yet infused with the melancholy of the present. Sale's figures are thin, their poses romantic, the watercolors by Matt Hollingsworth warm and soft. The Matt Murdock found within these pages is a little stiff outside the costume, but roguish and brave in his yellow tights. He bounds across the rooftops, swings between the buildings, bounces off flagpoles without a care. Trade one artist for the other, and the tonal mismatch between storytelling style and art would be terrible. But Romita Jr. and Sale are right for their respective writers. When comparing Yellow to The Man Without Fear, Loeb discussed how his interpretation tried to capture the carefree nature of Daredevil's early years, whereas Miller explored a Matt who had been hardened by the world in a style similar to Batman. Their origins are not that different. Both lost their parents to violence. Both put on a costume to do something about it. But Matt was older and also caught the man responsible. That has made a huge difference. Actually, Matt's origin is even closer to Robin's and in many ways follows that pattern of behavior. When Frank came on board, he retrofitted Batman's angst into the character, which was brilliant. But at his core, Matt, at this point in his life, is fairly well adjusted. Daredevil is only about trying to tip the scales of justice. He is a superhero lawyer, so to speak. And that's different than Batman, who is not only out for justice, but there is an element of revenge in everything he does. Matt has no issues of revenge. After the death of his father's killer, he sees a wrong and wants it righted. Very clean. The Man Without Fear's world is slashed with rain and covered in grime. It's a dark, brutal setting, and the people in it live hard lives. People die ugly. Jack Murdock most of all. Sale's New York is bright and evocative of a more idealistic past. Its criminals feel more like classic gangster movies, even if the death of Jack Murdock is still shocking and sad. Dad. I love you, Dad. Did you hear? I love you. Making a difference in these two worlds requires different daredevils. Despite both versions first driven toward heroism as revenge for his father's murder, the dispositions and drives of the two Matt Murdocks are quite different from one another. The Matt of Man Without Fear is a coiled animal, filled with years of suppressed rage. When he's given the chance, it's unleashed in wild abandon, despite knowing it's wrong. It's very Frank Miller. A writer whose heroes were often men struggling against their worst impulses, for better or worse. Matt's rage comes from a difficult childhood and a father who, while loving, was a mess of a man. This Daredevil's exploits are narrated by Miller's omniscient, third-person captions, typified by the writer's hard-boiled noir style. In Yellow, Matt is a far more reserved, romantic lead, a man who has lost much, but who can still savor the good things in life. Loeb's writing feels more naturalistic and melancholic. Jack Murdock wasn't perfect, but he taught Matt to persevere when in pursuit of what's right. Being Daredevil helps Matt feel like his father is alive in him. I went looking for my dad's killers and found myself back in the gym where he had lived his life. When I punched Slade, I could hear my dad's glove hitting the heavy bag. When Slade went down, it felt like my dad had knocked him to the canvas. It was thrilling. The result is a Daredevil who questions what he's doing with his life, but is propelled by justice over rage. Slowly, his love for Karen helps him see his role as Daredevil as more than a way to carry on his father's legacy. Karen, you were the first one to call me the man without fear. I liked that, even reveled in it. I was, am, will always be, so much like my dad. The yellow and red costume that carries his father's boxing colors eventually becomes pure red, inspired by Karen. In The Man Without Fear, Matt's great love is Elektra, a vicious killer with the same unbridled impulses. And our hero hates himself for giving in to emotion, a sudden, violent fall into love, which he believes will only hurt others close to him. In Yellow, it's Karen, a smart, insightful woman far more gracious and sweet. Matt is hesitant to fall in love because his superhero identity draws danger. Their affection is kind and graceful, a gentle fall into love rendered tragic in retrospect. Love takes many forms in Daredevil Yellow. The fatherly love of Jack Murdock sets Matt on the path toward heroism and the will to fight on despite so much loss. The love of Karen teaches Matt to see beyond a singular purpose and open his heart to so much more. In the wake of her death, writing letters to her that she will never read gives life meaning once again. Do you know how some people say, "I see," when they mean, "I understand"? It is like I can see now. A blind man who can see, Karen, is a rare thing, like you were. And since we never know what is going to happen tomorrow, I wouldn't trade all my yesterdays for the time we had together. I miss you, Karen, and I will always love you. Violent justice is a pathway to purpose for Matt in The Man Without Fear. All those years of pent-up rage are given meaning when the innocent Mickey must be saved. Years of training, years of unknowing preparation snap into place when a life is in jeopardy. It's no longer about the fear of accidentally taking a life. As Daredevil, it's all about saving one. And that purpose continues long after. The costume is probably a good idea. Sewed it myself. God only knows what it looks like. The legacy and lessons of Jack Murdock live on in Matt. The identity of Daredevil hones anger and ability into purpose. And the love of Karen inspires a hero to fight on. Whether it's outright stated in Matt's thoughtful musings in Yellow, or intrinsic to his hard-fought struggles in The Man Without Fear, these stories illustrate the essence of Daredevil and what shapes a soul. The measure of a man is not in how he gets knocked down to the mat. It is in how he gets up.